Any everything is clear to you now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let us start. So today our topic with mainly I will do the petrophysics part. Okay, so what already you have studied, but I try to sum it up in two classes, today's and tomorrow's class. It's a huge slides. I have put it together, 60 slides, just to show you why petrophysical information is very important for understanding reservoir characterization, and then taking follow-up action. Okay, so just this is just representation in terms of your reservoir. It may be in shallow depth, it may be offshore, it may be onshore, it may be in carbonate reservoir, it may be a sandstone reservoir. So that means first we need to understand what is a reservoir that we have already studied in terms of the sedimentological point of view, in terms of our particularly the storativity or maybe storage capacity of a rock, then their transmissibility or maybe their transmission ability or maybe their permeability point of view. So and then we need to understand how much wettability means in terms of wettability also, because if you really planning for the exploitation of the crude oil from the subsurface reservoir, these aspects are very important. Okay, so it's not that it's very mathematical information you will gather. What by combining different informations, we need to predict the behavior of reservoir and we need to plan for our exploitation. Okay, so that is how we need to go ahead. So if I just go to the next slides, you can see this is the whole reservoir. This reservoir is actually you can see a saturated reservoir where you have a gas cap. Then we have our oil zone and we have a bottom water drive reservoir. So once you start taking productions, you can see the different volume increase that we have discussed in our material balance calculation. Okay, so you see the important aspect is we have different mineralogy of our reservoir, we have different textural aspect of the reservoir, we have different connectivity, then we have different types of fluid inside the reservoir, they have different saturation level, they have their different occupancy, means how they occupy the pore space in the reservoir. So that means this is our holistic understanding about the reservoir. Then we try to get their physical nature means depth of the reservoir, onshore, offshore, type of the reservoir rocks. Then what we try to gather information regarding the reservoir energy. So if you see this figure, what we have here, the aquifer means it is, you see this is not a edge water drive, it's a bottom water drive. So that means yes, so obviously once you get this type of picture, automatically you have certain framework in mind. So this is a rock. Okay, so this part means is it a sandstone rock, is a carbonate rock. So automatically the background information actually supporting us for getting our holistic idea about the reservoir. How should I go ahead for managing my reservoir? Okay, so let's say this is a carbonate rock reservoir. So you can understand which sort of flow equations I should predict. Okay, so that means when I am working with a sandstone reservoir and when while I am working with a carbonate reservoir, my looking at the exploitation activities is completely different. Collecting the information is completely different. So these are the basic part when you have studied the sedimentological aspect of the rock, or maybe the reservoir point of view, the porosity, permeability. So that time our basic understanding should be very clear and our mindset, so that the philosophy or the sequence I follow for a carbonate reservoir may not be followed in a sandstone reservoir. So that is okay. So you see this is what the crystalline rock reservoir. So now if you just go back and try to understand, a sandstone reservoir is more or less homogeneous in nature in the porosity distribution throughout the rock, maybe. Okay, but in carbonate reservoir you don't have this sort of homogeneity in the carbonate reservoir. But when you are getting again the crystalline rocks behaving as a reservoir, their connectivity of the pores or maybe their storage capacity and their connectivity is completely different. If you just see the left top corner figure, is very much, it's a basalt with a columnar joint. So these can act as a reservoir. Then you have vesicular rock, different amygdaloidal basalts. So each and every rock can act as a reservoir. So now the perspective from your point of view is, when I am dealing with a sandstone reservoir, when I am dealing with a carbonate reservoir, when I am dealing with a crystalline reservoir, my point of view, looking into the production profile, looking into their production ability or well productivity of a well will be completely different. And that is the basic point which I need to gather from my different understanding. And how we have already discussed this part. We collect the information in different scale. So what my role is, I am collecting information in different scale, but I need to give a holistic broad picture about my static reservoir. How the reservoir is, what is the dimension, how the boundaries are, is there any connectivity between different blocks existing in a reservoir? Because this, all the information, so that means whenever, if I just give an analogy with the doctors, medical practitioners, they are collecting information from different point of view. Let's say blood samples collection, pressure study, ECG, EEG. So what they are trying to sum it up all the information to understand the patients, their behavior, the problem of the patients, and how to tackle this problem. So our role is similar in terms of that. So we are collecting information from hand chips, maybe the rock chips. We are collecting from whole core, maybe the sidewell core. We are collecting information from the logging study. We are collecting information from the your oil test analysis and from the seismic. So combined way, I need to put my understanding. So this is my knowledge. As an engineer, it's not that I know sir, logging is very much better way. This is one part of the story. But once I need to articulate each and every information, I should be very much comfortable or convenient to analyze all the data to go ahead. Okay, so this diagram also I have shown you earlier. Okay, so initial part. So now this part is clear to you now?
Yes, sir.
During drilling, so hopefully as you are going, so you should be aware of that when you are collecting a whole core, when, because you may be working as a professional, let's say geologist during the drilling time. You may be a well site geologist. You may be because you need to give the requisition for collecting a core samples, whole core, or maybe a sidewall core, depending on the situation. So this is hard, but that means when you are planning for a professional, you should be well off or well versed with your activity, what should be done, when should be done. If the reservoir or maybe the pay sands has already been cut or already been drilled, if you are expecting to get a whole core from there, that means you have missed the opportunity to collect a whole core. So that's why when we are working as a professionals, we should be very active, because this drilling site isn't just a war footing. Okay, so this is core information. So you see just the broad picture. I have more or less covered every part of it. You can see here, particularly every people are benefited by the core. Every people. Okay, so a completion engineer, he also use the information of the rocks. A geologist also getting the information regarding lithology, petrography, deposition environment. A reservoir engineer also getting the information regarding the porosity, all petrophysical informations, and also the log. If you remember, we collect AMN parameter. Now in logging, if you remember the Archie's equation, SW. So we know this for collecting, for estimating SW, we require A, M, and N parameter. Saturation exponent, cementation factor, and a constant parameter. Okay, where from we'll get that? From core plug study. And if you remember, that is all from the core plug resistivity information, isn't it? So this information actually helping us to gather all the information from different sources. Okay, so this is just a figure how we collect sidewall core. Okay, just okay. So this is whole figure. So we send this is a bullet, actually core bullet. Okay, so bullet will go and they will just cut when everything has been drilled out, the formation has been, you could not collect a whole core samples. That time you may utilize this to get the information for your rock formations. Okay, so these are, have you seen this core plug and side maybe different core plug samples? Have you seen in the labs or anywhere?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
okay, okay, very good,
Yes,
very good.
sir.
So these are called whole core plug. Different size you could collect. Yes. So in our core flooding apparatus, we can use different types of core plug samples for getting dynamic information of the saturation level, sometimes for permeability values. Okay. So now reservoir rocks. So this is what from your seismic study, from your report, from your other information also we try to gather information, because you see environment is very much important. If you see three isolated pockets of oil in the diagram, let's say if you don't know the environment, how do you connect? Let's say I drill three well. One is in the first pool, second pool, and third pool. Now you are asked to understand or give the reserve estimation. How do you go for it? Because if you see, more or less all three oil pools are in the same depth, isn't it?
Yes.
If I drill three wells in all three pools, isolated pools, but if I ask to give what is the reserves there, I should sometimes connect all the three oil pools together, isn't it? So that's why you should understand what is the reservoir type. Is it the because sedimentary environment will guide you. If these are the sandbar environment, so my all the oil pools may not be connected or may not be continuous. So that is how each and every information of your subject is giving you knowledge to gather the informations. Okay. So this is for us. I'm just summing it up, whatever we have learned so far, just to put in a perspective. So why these are required for us. So porosity. So normal porosity, you know what are the different types of porosity. We have primary porosity, we have secondary porosity, then we have different types of bhagi porosity, fracture porosity, isn't it? So depending on the type of the rocks or maybe reservoir, you may have different types of porosity in the sandstone reservoir, carbonate reservoir, and based on different value, we can put it good porosity, intermediate, bad porosity like this. Okay, just see the difference of your left side is a sandstone reservoir and right side is a carbonate reservoir. What is the difference? Okay, so only the knowledge what you have to take. If I am working with a sandstone reservoir, more or less they are homogeneous in nature, their distribution pattern is more or less regular. So if I get a small information from a simple core plug, sometimes I can upscale information in my reservoir scale. But if it is carbonate reservoir, their distribution pattern is very irregular in nature. So that's why we should be very careful regarding the upscaling of my porosity information in the carbonate reservoir. Okay, so that is how we should be careful. So that's why whenever you are planning to do the subsequent work, each and every information actually give you a strong footings or strong base to think logically. Okay, so now how we get the porosity from the core plug samples, isn't it? From the also from the logging part. So that is how we got porosity. So if I just put in the how we get the porosity, one from the core plug samples and another from the well logging information. What are the well logs we use for porosity estimation? Abdul?
Neutron density.
Abdul is there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what are the logging, which logs we use for porosity estimation? It is there in the screen.
Yeah, sonic log, natural log.
Okay, so this part has been completed for you or not yet? Porosity?
Not yet.
Yes, sir.
Completed?
Yes, sir.
Logging or done now. Okay. So that means what if you are just going for your, let's say if you remember our particularly the volumetric reserve estimation assignments. Okay, if you remember, you can understand we required porosity and how to average the porosity. So that means during the work you need to collect information from the core plug samples and from the logging information, and then yes, so isolated well informations as well as core information actually help you to think particularly how to average the porosity throughout your reservoir. Okay, so this is one part which you have to take care. So what we are getting information from the well log, we are getting information from the core plug samples. Now scale are different, their information may be different. Now your responsibility is how to take care of the value for porosity of my whole reservoir. So this is your responsibility. Now fluid saturation, how we gather fluid saturation and why it is important. So Kishan has joined today or not? Kishan, 5 joined. So no, so all are not joined. So okay, Shreya, Krishna, then Abdul and Suman. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. So now why we require fluid saturation is important, and how we gather the information. Suman, it is in the screen. Okay. So fluid saturation are very important for quantifying our volume of reserves. Number one. Number two, how much. Number two is the saturation. Actually, if you remember your particularly the relative permeability graph, see the relative permeability values are varying with the variation of the fluid saturation, isn't it? So that's why when you are predicting the flow behavior from a reservoir, we should know what is the saturation, present saturation level. Otherwise, we cannot.
And secondary method, sir.
A secondary EOR, obviously, because if you are trying to implement or take up a project for EOR, you should know how much oil is there for further recovery. Otherwise, if you don't have the residual oil saturation, how much you cannot implement your EOR, you can go for any EOR technique to be implemented, isn't it? So that is how the saturation, and how we get the saturation.
One minus step.
It is there in the screen. If you just go through it, one is direct approach, another is indirect approach.
Direct approach.
So direct approach means if you get a preserved core samples. What is a preserved core samples? Anybody see a preserved core samples? You got this idea? Preserved core samples.
Sir, due drilling time, no sir, is
Yes.
collect from and collect and preserve for
In situ pressure temperature condition. Yes. I mean, how you collect, that means the core barrel what we use, that is actually the auto sealing. Means once it collect the core plug samples, whole core, it can seal it. So pressure and temperature can be in its original condition. That's why this core is called a preserved core. So once we get a preserved core and take it out, from that we can get certain information about the original fluid saturation. Okay.
yes, sir.
Second is one, you can see, you remember your Archie equation of fluid saturation. Okay. SW.
Yes, sir.
So that means the resistivity information help us to get the SW, in situ SW, and another is capillary pressure graph. If you remember, when we are injecting a core plug with the mercury, then we got certain capillary pressure versus saturation graph, isn't it? That also something will help us to get, particularly fluid saturation means the residual, coordinate water saturation. So that is how we are getting. So are you getting what we are trying to sum up together? So these are the information you should keep in mind. So that's why I thought, okay, let me sum it up together so that why this is required for characterization. So this is one part, return distillation and dense extraction methods by using the solvent and evaporation technique. Okay, we just try to get a preserved core samples, how much fluids are there, different fluids are there. Okay, so this is from the core plug samples, and I will not go through this in detail, but I will just show you how we got SW from the logging information. Okay, so just this is what we got. Nah? If you remember, we have studied in the last semester. So how this, because we have, I'll go to the last formulations. Okay, actually these are the resistivity. So this formulation, this one. Okay, the last formulations. Is it visible, the last formulations?
Yes.
Yes, SW is equals to.
Yeah. So this formulation is important. Oh, SW, this is information. Okay. So if you remember, this SW is equal to RO, or we can change this formulation slightly with RO into 5 to the power N, isn't it? Divided by RT into 1 upon N. So this is
5 to the power M.
Yes, 5 to the power M. So that is the another formulation which you can use to get our total A part. Okay. So now next is your okay. So now what about interfacial tension and porosity? Interfacial tension, if you remember, now two types of interfacial tension, is it, or wettability. Okay, I'm not going into interfacial tension now because interfacial tension is between two fluids or surface tension. Okay, either gas or liquid to liquid. So particularly this is important when we are dealing with the EOR mainly. Okay, so EOR means when we are trying to produce more, that time we generally use, and this is also an important, but wettability is important particularly when we are dealing particularly for the production part. So we have two types of wettability. One is your water wettability mainly, and strongly oil wet. Okay, so now if you remember our discussion during the saturation part, we may have the distribution of different minerals throughout the rocks. It may be carbonate minerals, it may be sandstone, sand grains. So now depending on the wettability, your occupancy of the pores are different in different places. So now it's not very easy to visualize, but we need to understand different points actually, how the pores are filled with different fluids. If you see, a carbonate reservoir is generally oil wet, whereas sandstone is generally water wet. But depending on the size of the pores, right from the beginning, when the hydrocarbon fluid is basically occupying the pore space, from that time basically your occupancy or maybe the saturation is involved, or saturation history is involved, isn't it? So if I just ask you, a small pores will be always filled with water. Why? A small pores is always filled with water. If I set a question like this, 2 marks, small pores of the reservoir are always filled with water. Justify the statement. Because the small pores could not be knocked out by the, from the beginning of the reservoir condition, they will be filled with water. That water could not be knocked out by the oil, which is basically occupying the pores during the migration of the oil. So that's why, what that means, this is very important understanding. If you just visualize, we have plenty, or we have a big reservoir having different distribution pattern of the minerals, their size of the pores are different. So when the crude oil is migrating from its source, it could not occupy each and every pores. Depending on the mineralogy, depending on the size of the pores, the capillary actions will be different and wettability would be different, and that's why each and every pores will be differently filled. And that's why it's very important to understand this heterogeneity throughout the reservoir, and that understanding actually help you to guide properly how you should work throughout, or how you should work. Okay, so why it is important? Because you can see their occupancy would be different. If you just see this graph, okay, is it now visible, the how the crude oil, gas, and water is occupying? Everybody is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now you see, when, if I don't particularly know the wettability of the rocks, or maybe how the pores are occupied, now if I just try to understand the resistivity of this rock, so how you see the water, the electrical current will pass through the water, no? So water is occupying the pore space, the path is different, you see the curved path. But if it is just the reverse, that means the oil is occupying the in place of water, the path will be straight like this. That means, that's why when we are analyzing particularly the resistivity, and from resistivity we are getting the water saturation value. So wettability plays a very important role to understand. So that's why it is not how I am visualizing. My visualization should be in the molecular level, in the pore level. So how the pores are occupied by different types of minerals, particularly the sand grain, the clay, the feldspar, the carbonate minerals, and how wettability distributed throughout the rock, and how my information should be analyzed. Because if you don't know, your actual path is different than the original path, isn't it? So that's why your length will be different. So tortuous path will be different, and accordingly you will analyze the same resistivity value for different water saturation. So that is how wettability plays a very important role, and this is what we have already discussed, the contact angle, how contact angle will measure in our laboratory also, and how we get this information. Okay, so wettability, and this is the different types of wettability. One is your Amott wettability, another is your Amott Harvey wettability. How this has been done? Any idea? Just I'll just give you here the idea. Okay, you see, we just do two things. One is a water saturated core plug samples. Okay, put it in a oil. Okay, and then we forcefully take out the water. Two values. One is spontaneous from displacement by water, oil, and the forceful displacement by oil. Similarly, a oil filled core plug samples in put in water and similarly measure the two value. So that way we are trying to get this ratio, displacement ratio by displacement by oil ratio and displacement by water ratio. So when they are close to 1, then what is the meaning of it? Close to 1 means neutral wettability. Okay, that means in both the cases oil and water displaces spontaneously, and and forceful displacement both are same. But let's say if I just give you one just an example, a core plug filled with oil, now we put it in water, no oil is coming out. So what is the meaning of it? It is water wet or oil wet. It is oil wet rock, because if oil, because the core, because the oil favors or oil prefers to stay into the core plug itself. No oil is coming out. That means it is oil wet rock. If I put a full core plug saturated oil into the water and some oil is coming out, means what? Because water wet, because water is preferring to go into inside the core plug rather than, so that's why it is a water wet. So that actually same values are put in mathematical form, and that actually giving you this part. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left for 40 minutes. Maybe I'll try to cover this part. Okay, so you can see when you have neutral weight, both the cases 0, but when water weight, displacement by water will be positive, spontaneous displacement, and in case of oil weight you are positive. So this is actually, these values are actually the physical values, the volume, and that gives us the different types of values. Okay, so weighting phase will be always weighting the rock surface. Okay, the attractive force, and they will, and non-weighting phase will be always occupying the central part of the pores, isn't it? So just like the figure which I have shown you earlier. So weighting phase will be always, and that's why wettability plays a very important role for our understanding about the reservoir. Okay, so now effect of wettability. Just see these two graphs. The relative permeability graph of oil and water. So if you just consider 50% saturation, water saturation, so relative, so that means this understanding is very important when you are predicting the fluid production behavior. So if I consider a 50% saturation of water, so you can see the water production in case of strongly water weight rock will be very less, isn't it? And the same 50% if I consider oil and water production is more or less same, relative permeability value. So that is how understanding particularly the distribution pattern of the wettability as well as the pore distribution and the respective relative permeability graph, because what is our role as an engineer? Nobody will give you this graphs. Okay, you need to generate the graphs, or you need to maybe correlate your behavior with certain demonstrated graph, and from that you have to predict the behavior. Because I told you, if you are planning for the exploitation of reservoir, it is not only for 1 year, it is for 50, 60, 70, 80 years down the line the reservoir will produce. And that reservoir, you have to plan it accordingly, depending on the behavior of the crude oil, depending on the behavior of the rock property, changing of the rock property with time, changing of the water saturation with time. So that is the most important aspect you need to understand. Okay. So any question in this point?
No, sir.
Okay. So now this is also an important graph. Sometimes I put questions out of it. Okay, so you see wettability index. If it is positive, water weight. If it is negative, then it is oil weight. Okay. So first graph, if you see the initial water saturation. So what is initial water saturation? What is corner water saturation? What is could you tell me what is initial water saturation and what is corner water saturation? Initial water saturation.
Carbonate water is irreducible water saturation.
Yes, irreducible water. That means what? That means this area reservoir has been completely flooded with oil. Okay. So nothing has been, so whatever is there, that could not be displaced by the migrating oil, isn't it? So this is cornered water saturation. Sometimes cornered water saturation and initial water saturation is same. Let's say sufficient oil has not come into the reservoir. So that time also water saturation.
Sir, your voice are not clear, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is sometimes due to connectivity. Okay, let me check connectivity. Sometimes due to, is it not clear?
No, sir.
No. Okay, let connectivity, but the connectivity is good. Going. I think time it's 36, 37 minutes is over, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it will go automatically. So this graph we'll discuss, and maybe we will stop today for this. So now you see oil recovery is maximum in case of neutral wettability. If you see this graph, the right side graph, you have a 0 means neutral wettability, positive means water weight, and negative means oil weight. Okay. Okay. And the left side graph, if you see, there is a trend. Why this trend? Trend means when you have negative wettability, you see the initial water saturation is less. Why? Can anybody comment on this?
Sir, can you repeat? We can't hear. I can't hear.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the left side graph, you see when you have the negative wettability index, that time your initial water saturation is less in general. Okay, but once you go towards the right side, that means positive wettability index, your initial water saturation increases. Could you comment on this graph? Very simple answer.
I cannot hear you.
Okay, so if you see the left graph, is it now visible, audible?
The graph is visible.
Yeah, visible. So
Visible, but your voice not clear, sir.
okay,
Your voice is cutting.
cutting, yeah, due to this connectivity now. But your voice is very clear to me. Okay, so now just if I put it
Can you repeat again, sir?
left side graph, it is visible. Left side.
It's
Yes,
visible,
sir.
sir, but
Sir,
your voice not clear, sir.
Okay, so maybe remaining time we have 3.5 minutes. Okay, so can anybody of you explain why this is the behavior of the left graph? Anybody of you? Behavior of the left graph. Krishna, you see there is a trend. Trend means when when you have a negative wettability index, the initial water saturation is less. But once we move towards the right side, in general, the weightability
Is what wettability is high, sir.
yes. That means when you have water weight, that time
And middle part is oil.
So water
Oil
in
saturation is high.
case of water weight, the saturation is water saturation is high.
why?
And in
Why?
case of
Because
oil
because because the oil which is migrating and displacing the water due to the water weightability, they could not displace much of the water, isn't it? That's why initial water is more.
Sir, cannot hear.
Yes, so problem is there. Okay, so could you repeat, Krishna, what I said so that Suman can also understand?
in positive water wettability index, the initial saturation is high because and in this negative,
This is oil weight.
yeah,
Negative means oil weight.
oil
Okay.
weight, yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
So in that case, it is low because it cannot displace more
No. It will displace
water.
more because in
Okay.
oil weight reservoir, oil will easily enter.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the fact.
Yeah.
That's why,
Yeah.
because it is from the initial part, it is saturated with water. Okay, now when oil is entering or no, oil is migrating from its source to the reservoir, they can easily displace the water which is there in the oil weight, but they could not displace the water which is in the water weight rock because
Water weight. Yes.
yes. So that is the why. So if I ask you a question like this, putting this diagram, could you explain the trend of this initial water saturation in this diagram? Could you explain it?
Yes.
Yes. So this is one part. Right side, if you see this graph, it is actually the oil recovery is maximum in case of neutral weightability, whereas
Neutral
oil,
wettability.
okay, but in case of both the end, water weight and oil weight, the recovery is not maximum. It is the lowest. So how it is? Why? Why it is? So now you see when a pore is occupied, okay, it is surrounded by the waiting rock and the non-waiting phase is at the center, isn't it? When they are isolated, they cannot be in touch with other fluids which is in the nearby pore. They are not a continuous phase. That's why they are stuck up. They could not be produced. That's why if it is neutral weight, then there is a possibility they can go to the contact of other phase and they could move out. So that's why neutral weightability will produce more, whereas both the weightability, other oil